From Energy.media, this is Energy Superheroes with Peter Perry. Hey everybody, welcome to Energy Superheroes. I'm excited today to have David Stephen Jacoby and Alok Gupta. They are co-authors of an exciting new book called Reinventing the Energy Value Chain. I'd also want to point out that they are partners in Boston Strategies International. Very intelligent gentlemen that wrote an interesting book that I'm excited to talk about today. Before we get started, I'd like for David to take 20 seconds and introduce himself, and Alok to do the same. We're excited. This is our first Energy Superheroes with more than one guest. So it was designed to have multiple guests, and now we've executed on our vision. David and Alok, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So you asked me to introduce myself. I think you gave me 20 seconds. I'll easily fit within that.
Because we're going to have way more to ask you about afterwards.
Sure. Well, I guess you could basically split my career into about two phases. For the first phase, I was involved in transportation, logistics, and supply chain management. I joined out of Wharton MBA. I joined a consulting company called Kearney. We serve global 500 clients like General Motors, BASF, DuPont, Canadian National Railway, and others. And I lived in France, Brazil, Hong Kong, and other places. And then for this next half, I would say it's basically been a focus on energy supply chains. I built Boston Strategies International, my own the consulting firm up from scratch, and we worked for companies like Saudi Aramco, BP, Chevron, Vattenfall, NEC Energy Storage, and others. And I lived in the Middle East and the United States mostly during that time. And now I'm focused on sustainable energy supply chains and some of the technical and critical issues involved in getting them off the ground, such as end-of-life disposal of toxic chemicals involved in solar and wind, solar panels, wind turbines, rare earths and critical minerals, etc., battery storage, and the like. So that's our focus right now in both ventures and consulting.
Very good, David. Thank you. Alok, take it away.
Thanks, Peter. I'm academically trained in energy and environmental economics. Essentially, energy and sustainability economist. For a number of years, and I continue to sort of engage with David on a number of projects. I'm a partner at BSI. And at the same time, I'm the founder and CEO of a venture that I started 4 years ago called Invecologic. And what the focus area essentially is conveyed in the name itself. Invecologic is a synthesis of environment and economic logic. And the main focus essentially is to mainstream environmental decisions, right? By bringing out the ROI value and creating the economic feasibility. Whether it's about new sustainability technologies or it's about key sustainable oriented decision making, they need to be mainstream because that's really going to drive the future growth. In our most recent endeavors, David and I have co-authored a book together called Reinventing Energy Value Chains, and we're extremely excited about it. The focus area together as such right now is to really play an important role in translating a lot of new and niche technologies into reality. So that's what we're doing as professionals.
That is super cool. It's great to hear that. Before I even get into the weeds of the book, which I want to very much, I want to know the audience listening here, because I don't want to forget this question. It's very important. Who can benefit most from your work in this audience? Who are the types of companies that you guys like to reach? David, if you want to take that, and then Alok, over to you.
Sure.
Well, I think if you start off with the oil and gas companies, I mean, we do work and have worked for companies like the big national oil companies, Total, the Emirates National Oil Company, Saudi Aramco, and others, and they need supply chain management techniques to achieve that cost reduction to compete with renewables. A lot of it consists of digitalization opportunities like virtual reality, augmented reality drones, and things like that. And then on the renewable side, we're involved with solar and energy storage scalable ventures. I mentioned NEC energy storage, but also PV modules of all shapes and sizes, companies like Trina Solar, lithium ion battery manufacturers that are pursuing solid state batteries, as well as minerals supply chains. One of our clients is CBMM, which is a Brazilian mining company. It makes alloys, specialty alloys for the batteries. Um, and then in the case of like hydrogen, interested in the green hydrogen and the blue hydrogen manufacturers, which often coincides with the oil companies, as well as the fuel cell manufacturers. Hydrogenics comes to mind, and the fuel distributors and refueling networks. The refueling networks is one of the areas where we see the biggest challenge for the entire transition, and we'd like to be a part of overcoming that challenge by contributing our tools and techniques. And then, of course, I mentioned we also have served major wind farm developers.
Now, that is a great summary. I appreciate that. And that'll lead to a lot of questions. Alok, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh yes. In addition to in addition to what David mentioned, um, I think that our audience could also include governments of many nations, right? We're living in the times where climate change is staring at us, and now it's not just we're not we have gone way beyond just negotiations with not much result, but countries are taking upon themselves because they're now seeing that it's got a real impact on the economic growth and business growth as well. So we're living in the times when countries have already started spelling out net zero targets, and our book, Reinventing Value Chain, and the kind of principles and roadmap structures that we're talking about can have a huge impact on devising strategy and roadmap to achieve net zero targets that many of these governments are setting up. So especially in the context of emerging economies, where uh, even though very ambitious targets are being set, but the a realistic roadmap does not exist. And these are the economies and governments that could also be very crucial audience and beneficiaries.
I love
That's great. Thank you.
Peter. I don't know if I could tag on to the back of that, but
Go for it.
in addition to the sort of future planning that arises when one says governments and agencies, we're also working with governments and agencies on some aspects of what to do with stranded assets. So, meaning that basically, if you're going to abandon oil and gas or fossil fuel production and power generation, what do you do with all those assets? And so, one of our projects right now has to do with, which is government funded, has to do with what do you do with coal? And it sounds like a funny question, but there's a whole economy which is based on coal production and processing right now. When you take away the demand, what do you do with all those assets? What do you do with all those skills and all those people? So we're involved in that kind of studies as well.
Those are great studies, and not enough people are doing them because we do have those assets out there for sure. So I've got a bunch of questions now for you guys just based on the introduction. One item is you guys are supply chain experts. So a question that I have and that I've wrestled with, and I don't think it's an either or. So if we just take batteries and we take solar cells, I've heard a lot of people say for various reasons that the cost of batteries will not fall as fast as the cost of solar cells, having to do with manufacturing and the supply chain. I don't know if you guys would like to expound on that a little bit and touch on, it seems like solar panel prices, especially for PV, have come way down much faster than battery costs.
Well, I'll throw out a quick reaction to that. Battery, I made this point earlier. It's not just about costs. So what's happening is you have to measure cost per kilowatt hour or cost per energy storage potential. So in the battery world, performance has been improving massively as costs have been coming down. And so if you look at cost per performance, the batteries are really have come down. I admit, I understand not as far as the solar has come down on a cost basis, but where we're looking at the potential with solid state batteries and alternative high performance alloy anode and cathode chemistries, where the performance of batteries might increase faster than the cost of solar declines. And so it could end up sort of putting them on parity. But of course, ultimately, solar plus energy storage is the formula that makes the most sense anyway, because once you have solar and you link it with energy storage to cover the intermittency and the long duration differences that you find in what's called the duck curve, which is explained in with a funny diagram in one chapter of our book, then you have you need both.
So, David, you talked. I've heard you talk about different unique companies, and I'd love for you to sort of expound more on them. One of them was Solar Gem Technology. I'm not sure if that's a company or if it's a technology, but that's something I hear a lot, but I've never heard of that specific company and or technology. So, could you talk more about that and just how that maybe will change people's paradigm in terms of way of thinking about solar?
Sure, Peter. Well, the company I was talking about actually is not called Solar Gem. It's called Solar Earth Technologies, and they make a kind of a solar panel that can be embedded in things like sidewalks and steel structures and things. So actually, it's used a lot in municipal parks and remote areas where power is needed, and there isn't really an easy place to set up a big array of solar panels. So they produce. They are a sort of a tech lab, and one of the things they've been working on is a solar gem, which can be embedded in different technologies. So they're not quite there yet, but they're. I know there's progress going in that direction, and part of the reason I know there's progress going in that direction is one of our other clients makes a supply chain tracking technology that is in fact embedded in the product itself at the liquid level. So when the product is manufactured, let's say in the plastic or the polymer resin, the tracking technology, the tracking chemistry is actually injected into that so that it becomes part and parcel of the product. And so this whole idea of sort of embedding technology, tracking technology, supply chain technology, and energy production technology inside devices and articles as they're produced in the plant is coming on stream in a variety of different ways. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's it's very exciting. It's like 3D printing actually. If you think about 3D printing and the way that's evolving too, it's very much connected to that. So as we produce, let's say, pills in pharmaceuticals, you could produce a pill with a 3D printer, and then, but inside the substrate, the material actually could be embedded tracking devices, and then that gets a little scary because then maybe you're thinking about data privacy and actually the pill being digested and somebody tracking its way as it moves through your intestines. I'm not sure, but it gets a little sci-fi. But some things will go that way because actually the ability to actually track and trace at the micro level and everywhere and everything is kind of coming. That's another discussion. That's sort of tracking everything, everywhere, anytime. That's to be had on a more sort of blue sky conversation.
No, well, that certainly leads into the discussion of digitization, which is huge in the energy industry, and we do know that digital devices are going to track most everything. Of course, an obvious application that doesn't have too much privacy implication is just in the maintenance of power systems and as well as the supply chain.
Mhm.
Alok, maybe you could talk about digitization in general within the energy industry, and maybe as you've seen it in some of the projects you've worked on, would be helpful for the audience, I think.
Sure. But before I answer that question, I would like to point out one feature of that we try to focus on our book actually, which which got triggered. The thought got triggered when you asked this question, and that is that traditionally we look at supply chain in energy sector, right? And that was a huge value prop when David and I were really brainstorming on what the value proposition of the book should be. And then we went beyond supply chain ideas to value chain ideas, and hence the name of the book, Reinventing Value Chain. So, we've definitely gone beyond the traditional supply chain concepts and principles to also cover these aspects of the value chain, such as digitizations, artificial intelligence, and such similar concepts, which have a huge and increasingly more important role to play in the energy spectrum, right? And that's the reason this book becomes all the more important, because while we are trying to create roadmaps for success, it's important that uh, we are able to connect with other aspects of technology uh, to sort of accelerate the growth. And then we also have concepts such as cybersecurity to ensure that we're plugging the leakages, right? So coming back to your question, Peter, um, digitization has become an indispensable element of energy operations. We are talking about digital twins as increasingly a more and more complex feature of large energy infrastructures. And the whole idea of in this whole abstract print concept that we've been hearing of fourth industrial revolution is essentially being witnessed, largely in the energy sector, wherein digital twins are existing. The entire controls and monitoring can happen remotely. Every second, microsecond of data generation is happening, and that is has also led to huge advancements in terms of preventive maintenance, right? Like for example, you can't expect utility scale solar park to be in the middle of a city, right? It's obviously going to be way outside the bounds of the city. The terrain could be difficult, right? Now, there are technologies such as drones, which have embedded sensors which are capturing data constantly. So that has completely done away with human interventions in terms of monitoring, right? And this has taken digitization to just another level. And then the data is transmitted to the cloud, which is being accessed by guys sitting at the digital twin office, like the automation, like the remote office, which is looking at the big screen and looking at the data, and they know that, okay, out of these 1 million panels, this part specifically, this square meter of panels are malfunctioning or are about to malfunction, and they will quickly fix it. So digitization is happening at that level, and they're also being used in along with other emerging technologies such as drone technologies. And I would mention another couple of other key words which are buzzwords these days, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning, which are increasingly being integrated in energy operations.
No, that's very helpful, Alok. Thank you.
Peter,
David, I would, yeah,
can
jump
I
in.
add to
Go,
that
go for it.
just for a
Yes,
second? So,
please.
so I just want to add one part, which is kind of a meta interesting, if you will. So while of course AI is being used to sort of optimize like the production of power in different time brackets and by different turbines and that kind of thing, it can also be used to like tilt the blades in the right way and all that kind of technical stuff. One of the kind of transformational applications that we observed while writing the book is that there are some companies that are taking advantage of the supply demand gaps at a global level between producers and arbitraging them using this big data. So, for example, in Colombia, you might have a hydro plant that's running short on water because of the light rainfalls. And so it's actually needs energy. It's sort of got energy deficits. And at the same time, you might have a plant, let's say an offshore power generating plant offshore Finland, that's got is curtailing because of excess production at the moment. And so by kind of pulling this big data together and having it in real time, as Alok mentioned, kind of that second by second analysis, um, one company actually reached out in arbitrage with the help of an insurance company and a third party financial services provider. The idea to hedge the bets of energy production, hedge the risk of underproduction, and then to create financial instruments that basically transfer the power from
Wow.
the power producer in deficit, in surplus to the power producer in deficit around the other half of the world. So the AI applications can be not only technical but also financial and sort of at a very large scale. And this gives you some ideas to the frontier or the possibilities that these technologies raise. It's at one level it's transforming operations, but that's where we see supply chain from sort of a much higher level that can actually drive the change instead of being something that's looked at as like after the fact. Well, let's figure out our strategy and then to build the supply chain to do it. From our point of view, we look at how can we make a supply chain that drives the fundamental economics and changes the game of the industry.
That's incredible. That's something I actually had never heard before. You may get a call from Warren Buffett, from
Right,
Berkshire, because they
right.
are a lot of people don't realize they're the largest owner of power generation in North America. They own a ton of plants, and yeah, that's a super interesting application. Of course, he's a big owner of insurance and reinsurance as well, so he would be an ideal. Warren,
Right,
if you're out there, make sure you get in touch with these guys because that would be
right,
an
right.
ideal application for those for that company. That leads me into a question of so we have a lot of people in the audience that are with utilities. They work at regulated utilities, specifically in the United States. Regulated utilities like Berkshire Hathaway's Mid-American, NV Energy, like NextEra, like Duke, Southern Company, a whole host of these regulated utilities that are extremely profitable enterprises, very long thinking in nature, typically have multi-year integrated resource plans out many, many years in advance. What's the role for regulated utilities in this new world? What's a technology that they could maybe grab onto right now that they could start integrating or putting into their resource plans that maybe they haven't thought of? Because one thing I do know is some of the smartest technical people in the world work at these regulated utilities. I'll give a shout out to NextEra, who's our local utility here. I'm in Jupiter, they're in Juno Beach, our town right over. Brilliant people. I've met a lot of folks that work there. And I feel that the intellectual capital at these companies with the size and scope, they certainly have a role to play. So I would love to hear you guys, David and Alok, both weigh in on the role of regulated utilities in this changing world.
Yeah, sure. That is absolutely an interest to all these regulated utilities who kind of look at this world of the rapid transformation, kind of wonder where to start. So I have one suggestion, three words: virtual power plants. So no matter what technology they are using, whether they're using hydro or geothermal or fossil fuel generation or whatever, um, one of our clients is a company, it's a software and energy storage company that produces, that basically makes virtual power plants. So what that means is that they have very highly patented software algorithms that hook into energy production nodes, and that could be either an industrial facility, a cell of a cement plant, or any kind of a plant, or it could be a substation of an electric power transmission operation, and it then measures in real time all of the demand and supply and discharge rates coming in and out of those nodes, and it basically bounces that off of an economic model with its algorithms and tells you where to transfer energy, at what rate to store it, to discharge it, and release it from each node in order to maximize your profit. In other words, minimize the costs, both considering the asset cost and considering the operating and maintenance cost at the time in real time. And so almost no matter what kind of power generator, especially for a regulated utility, which you kind of teed up the question for, that you have lots of nodes of electricity power generation. And we're working with one of those companies you just mentioned, the Dukes, the Southerns, those kind of companies on this virtual power plant technology. I would say that that's almost that's pretty much the no-brainer starting point. And then beyond that, of course, there could be just a range and we provide roadmaps actually in the book. So that's one of the things that is useful. At the end of each chapter, we actually have a migration roadmap where we list about 5 to 10 different major technological and supply chain evolutionary steps that most companies would want to take.
Oh, that's great. Migration roadmap. I know people are looking for that because the complexity is just off the chart. Gone are the days of, we built some wind, we built some nuclear, we built some gas, and we have a portfolio. And as long as it's green enough, we're okay. It's just a real changing world. So, Alok, I would love it if you could touch more on emerging markets. You hinted at that a little bit in the beginning, and so if you think about the big two, China and India, being a major source of
Mhm.
CO2 emissions. Um, do you feel that just knowing what you know, that there is a roadmap for those guys to get sort of on board? We've had speakers come on and indicate, for example, that the U.S. has finally been able to decouple GDP from CO2 emissions, primarily because of the transition from coal to gas. So I always like to give a shout out to our home country. Hey, we're doing good. We're not where we need to be. We're still a huge, obviously, source,
Mhm.
but at least we're headed in the right direction. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on emerging markets, where they're headed, and what do things look like for them, and is it the same or is it a little bit different from, let's say, the U.S. and Europe?
That's a very good question, Peter. And when it comes to emerging markets, the dynamics that are really playing are different, definitely different. Because when you look at India, for example, India is at the crossroads um, of two important fronts. Number one is economic growth, right? That's a priority for a country like India. And the second one is playing a very important role in dealing with the climate crisis, right? And both these two things will have to be addressed. Now, one thing which is common for both these areas is energy. And energy is going to be a very, very, very crucial determinant in how India or any other emerging economy is performing in both these areas, right? So that's where India needs to think what it really needs to do. So and that's where the strategies will have to rely on to what extent does it really need to adopt the technologies? Does it really need to copy the West or look at its own resource constraints or its own ecosystem? So at this point, for example, we are doing really well in terms of adoption of solar, right? So we have set a target of we had initially set a target for achieving 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2022, which has now been increased to 400 gigawatts by 2024 by the current regime. Now, even though we are behind the schedule, but just setting these aggressive targets, we are growing much faster than we were growing earlier. India is actually heading the International Solar Alliance, and the idea is to really mobilize the resources and different stakeholders who could come together so that the capacity addition growth is super accelerated. Now, there are certain challenges that we do need to address. Because so much is going on, the scale is huge. There is a lot of suboptimal utilization of resources, and there is a bit of confusion in terms of what's the right policy and the way it translates into um, how should I put it? Inefficiency in the system, which results in um, which results in sort of discouraging private sector players from participating. Because ultimately, what really happens is that their profit margins are squeezed. And I'm going to make a very bold statement here. Uh, when I look at the entire picture of an emerging economy, uh, while it is growing, it there's a huge opportunity area wherein focus on improving the optimization, it could be a game changer. And in that value chain optimization in particular can be a game changer for these economies, because I'll give you an example. Right before the pandemic hit us, this we, the kind of renewable energy targets that we had set for India to be achieved by 2022, we had accomplished 30% of the goal in 70% of the time, which means that 70% of the target was remaining, and we only had 30% of the time. Now, in order to really amp up, we need more and more investment. We need more and more private sector players to operate. Um, the biggest discouraging factors is an extremely squeezed profit margins, especially when you will see that the levelized cost of energy in India is one of the lowest in the world. Now, in that kind of a scenario, uh, relieving pressure from the profit margin by every one percentage will count, will matter. And that is the potential which value chain optimization can really unlock. And that's the reason I say that it could be a game changer in emerging economies like India.
So could I
No,
could I talk
that's really helpful. Yes,
sorry,
David, please jump in.
one additional comment on emerging markets? There's a as Alok mentioned, the capacity to finance the projects is a constraint, and the capacity to finance the projects is not just a matter of money. It's a matter of regulatory frameworks and defining, for example, what energy storage is and whether it's an energy, whether it's a form of energy or not, and how it should be, if its pricing should be regulated, which is a major issue in the United States, still kind of being rolled out across various states, and it has been hampering it. So, and my point is that financing of the energy production and energy technologies is as important as actually the money. Let me give you an example. You know, you know what a home mortgage is, right? You know what a credit card is, right? So before home mortgages were created, you had to shell out a whole lot of money to buy a house, and not many people could do that. So as a result, certain people lived in castles, and other people were homeless, and that existed for millennia like that, really. And home mortgages kind of created this market where middle class people could access home buying. Well, it's sort of a similar thing going on in the energy industry. If you structure the pricing for some of these plants in a way that it can be paid back in time, and and the countries, especially developing countries, can access low cost financing, and it can be sort of the proper hedging instruments and arbitrage instruments we put into place to minimize the risk. They become more financeable. You have companies like Renaissance Capital going out there investing in power, renewable power in developing markets and in Eastern Europe and other places like that. Um, a lot of the ability to do that depends on de-risking, and de-risking can be done through creative financial instruments. There's a guy at the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, named Peter Mockel. Peter works on financing instruments, especially for energy storage in developing markets, and it's just around that. So it's not just a matter of millions and billions of dollars. It's also a matter of creating and crafting creative pricing and financial instruments that can, like the kind of earlier I was describing with the power arbitrage between the Finnish and the Colombian company, that can create value where there wasn't value before. That if you can do that, you don't need capital.
That's a really great point. And it's amazing you bring that up, because we had originally structured the Power Talks format to be decarbonization, digitization, and decentralization. We just wanted to talk operational stuff just because that happened to be who was interested. But as we started talking to more and more people, we had to add a fourth component that's really mostly around finance and geopolitics, because that area is huge to this, to the world of energy. And exactly what you said, I've had so many creative financial folks come out of the woodwork to talk about unique financing structures, and we forget. And I'm really glad you brought up the point about home mortgages, because uh, I think over the last 20 years there's been a lot of negativity around the financialization of things, but we forget how that's democratized the access to luxuries that previously in previous millennia, as you mentioned, were never available to the average folks. So we have to tip our hat to the financial world. Of course, the new renewal of the ESG theme is enormous. With BlackRock now saying they're going to invest in companies $7 trillion in assets based on their ESG score. So I think let's end with that. David, you can go first, and then Alok. Just talking about, let's say over the last 6 months, have you seen an increase in interest from financial folks around this ESG theme, and what impact do you think that's going to have in the long run?
Oh, yeah, but I'll say so there's absolutely been an increase in ESG. As you say, BlackRock kind of led the way in some of those announcements and some of the changes in their portfolio management, which then set the tone for others. I guess in similar ways, some of the ways that some industries work, like Walmart does something in the retail industry, and therefore everybody else, kind of all the other retailers, kind of have to fall in line. And I think that is happening right now with ESG. So there's sort of that tipping point that I was alluding to when I started about supply chain being the tipping point, where this has been coming on. All these technologies have been evolving for decades, and costs have been coming down for decades. But now with the ESG has been stemming for decades. I wrote a book in 2016, I think, called "The High Cost of Low Prices." It was about a supply chain view, how to account for. It's basically ESG kind of focused book on supply chains, and at that time even really the interest was marginal, I would say. But in the last few years, and particularly with the incoming U.S. administration changing the tone, saying now we're going to have like trillions of dollars, sort of suddenly invested in infrastructure and an energy, clean energy, that really does seem like we've passed a tipping point.
Alok, do you have anything to add to that you've seen in related to the ESG theme and financialization?
Yes, and I would comment from the perspective of the impact of the pandemic, because what pandemic has really done is that it has really made these big institutions think hard in terms of where to put their money, and uh, you know, renewable energies is definitely emerging as the winner going forward. And that's the reason a lot of financial resource allocation is happening there. And especially if you look at the behemoths, I would say oil and gas behemoths like Total, Shell, if the amount of investments they've started to make in renewable energy is testimony to the fact that financial resource mobilization is definitely happening in that direction, because ultimately it will flow in from financial institutions, and I can really sense that going forward, and that kind of a sort of those institutions who were really who were really at the threshold and kind of confused whether to go in right now or not. I guess pandemic has forced them to take clear cut decisions in terms of what they should do, and what the strategy should be for the for the next few years. And definitely renewable energy is attracting a lot of investments.
No, that's absolutely for sure. And I agree with you, David, about the tipping point, because I got into the industry back in 2009, and a lot of the finance folks we talked to said, forget about energy. It takes too long to get your money back. It wasn't an exciting area. There was a negative connotation around this phrase, clean tech. A lot of venture capitalists had lost lots of money investing in it, and it was just not popular. And then it was, for those that have been around a while, it's like all of a sudden it seems everybody in the world wants a piece of the energy market, and it only happened in like the last 6 months. So it did definitely hit a tipping point.
I share your historical story. When I was a kid, my parents bought stock in Philadelphia Electric Company, which was called Pico at the time, and it earned like a 2 to 4% annual return based on dividend payout. And the world has transformed now, and so that same company, after multiple acquisitions, is now like a unicorn. It's like it's a star performer.
Wow.
It is unbelievable. Yes, it's the world has changed dramatically, I would say, and it was a long time coming, but I think tipping point is often overused, but in this case, it's exactly the right word, because it's kind of like we were pushing a boulder up a hill, and then it was like all of a sudden, you never know where the top is, and then all of a sudden the boulder starts going fast down the hill. And it kind of feels like that's what happened.
Peter,
Um,
on that note, can I share something very quickly?
for sure, for sure. We
Growing
have
up,
no time limits here.
fantastic. And when you're engaging with passionate people like David and I, we
Oh,
tend to
it's a
get
great
carried away.
conversation.
So
I love
you
it.
slow us
I
down,
love
okay?
it.
So a very stark example and observation from India. So the government had sort of tried to create a lot of incentive programs to encourage investments in renewable energy, solar, wind, etc. And said that there would be tax benefits, there would be subsidies to XYZ extent, and so on and so forth. Um, some incentives were implemented and some were not because of whatever inefficiencies in the system, etc. However, uh, almost 80%, at least 70% people who are investing in solar, for example, and majority of consultants who are helping them um, look at the feasibility are not even considering these subsidies. Despite that, the inclination to invest in renewable energy is so high because the break even is happening much before than it would happen even 5 years ago. And so that's the point, right? The way these renewable energy technologies are becoming so competitive is that people are not even caring about the incentive programs. They're still going in and investing. So that's so now we are really seeing the real virtues of renewable energy manifesting in real terms.
No, and it is exciting. I went to school for economics as well,
Hmm.
and to me, it's a perfect use of the government when you're essentially taking something that is, to use an economics word, a negative externality, and
Yeah.
you're incentivizing it against it. I think it's an intelligent use of government. I'm not a big believer in many uses of government that are used. Not to get political, but I think this was absolutely the perfect use of government in, let's say, incentivizing against negative externality. So
Right.
I think it's great. And now we're seeing exactly what you're saying. We're getting to cost parity a lot faster than we otherwise would have been able to do if the government wasn't involved. So it's great stuff. David, do you have any parting shots for the audience? Is there anything I should have asked you that I did not that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, following up on our last discussion there about and Alok's comments about investors putting money in regardless of the subsidies, there have been some good studies out recently, and I forget the organizations. One might be the IEA, another might be ARENA, saying that actually the returns and the levelized cost of energy study as well shows that the returns, financial returns, by investing in the renewable energy stocks exceed the returns of the fossil fuel stocks over a certain period of time. And so there's no real, I mean, it's a very logical, and it's logical investor behavior. It's not hubris. It's not over indulgence. It's it makes logical sense. And then there
Makes
are
total
people who say,
sense.
well, how much? Because I know a lot of people say, well, there's like an inflation or overinvestment in, let's say, energy storage sector, where people are maybe factoring in too much, too high expectations about the decline in cost curves and things like that. But as far as regarding the future outlook, I myself am very bullish because I think this, I do believe in this tipping point idea. I do believe that supply chain management is not an operational or technical thing, that it can actually drive shareholder value and even change the game. So I think it's all coming together, and we really do need to reinvent the energy value chain. It's the right time.
It's awesome. Thanks, David. Alok, do you have any parting shots for us?
Sure. I guess the world altogether is at the cusp where we really need to look at renewable energy technologies very, very, very seriously. If anyone is not taking it up seriously at this point, they're going to be left behind. And this is the game changer right now. And the next 10 years is going to be, we're going to be witnessing really the landscape changing. And this would be aided by a lot of interesting technologies. But while we see a lot of interesting technologies interplaying with each other, and the result of which we can see in terms of how energy is being produced and used, we also have to be careful about issues like cyber attacks, as a lot of digitization is happening at the same time. So cybersecurity and similar, solutions will also have to be given due importance, so that we don't go 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. So we have to be very careful right now in terms of looking at the entire growth trajectory very holistically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we've seen that. And we had people yelling for years about cybersecurity. Nobody paid attention until, as we know, recently it became a massive issue that affected people's real lives in the real world very quickly. So I think that's a great point, Alok. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on today. David Stephen Jacoby and Alok Rajgupta. They are co-authors of Reinventing the Energy Value Chain, a phenomenal book. I suggest that all you guys get out there and pick it up. The book is available by Penwell Books, and it's also going to be available on Amazon.com. Check it out. Reinventing the Energy Value Chain, a great book. Thanks, gentlemen, for being on the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure, Peter.
For more energy superheroes with Peter Perry, visit energy.media.